Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Hunt Lift Eat podcast, brought to you by Hunt Lift Eat Official. I'm Carter, and running host with me tonight is the one and only Dan Bubba Wrights. What's going on, man?
Hey, man. How you doing?
Good, dude. I'm glad I'll admit this in front of everybody listening that I've been saying your name wrong in my head for like the many, many months that we've known each other. I'm glad we got that figured out before I pressed record.
It's good, man. That's my entire life. Like, it is the weirdest one pronounced.
Like, it doesn't feel right. I should probably check. We'll see. And then sure enough, dang it, man. But glad you're here, dude. I'm glad to tackle this one with you, man. And we've got an awesome guest tonight. So welcome to the podcast, Kriss-Abigail, wild game butcher extraordinaire. Stoked to have you here. So thanks for jumping on.
Stoked to be here for sure.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
So Dan, why don't you kind of give the listeners some context and discuss how you two know each other and how this kind of came to fruition here.
Yeah. So 2 months ago now, I think it was in April, I had the opportunity to go down to Texas and hang out with the guys from The Way We Hunt. They're all about education, helping people get into the hunting industry and kind of lowering those barriers that, you know, a lot of us are super fortunate of, like, either growing up with friends or family that have, you know, been in the hunting world and kind of helped us. Well, they really focus on helping folks that have like never experienced it in any way, shape, or form get into it. So I went down to Texas and killed some hogs with those guys. And then Kriss-Abigail put on the most incredible class I've ever seen as far as butchering goes. I've butchered everything. Like, I grew up on a farm. I've done everything from butchering our own chickens and cattle and everything to deer and elk, antelope. I quickly learned with Kriss-Abigail's class how much meat and how much time and how much headache that there's been wasted, and like just total nonsense I've done butchering animals until I got to see her work and learn from the master. And I was like, you got to come. I told her that next day. I was like, we got to have you on the podcast, seminar something, because I know a lot of the guys would definitely benefit from hearing from Kriss-Abigail and picking her brain a little bit.
Heck yeah. So did y'all shoot a bunch of stuff and then butcher it up? How did that kind of setup work down there?
Yeah. So they do a couple different classes. This one was a really quick, like, 1-day class. I went down a couple days early and did some hunting with them. Got a couple hogs on the ground, and then everybody that signed up for the class came in and was able to hands-on butcher a hog. There's people in class that had butchered stuff before. There's people that had never touched a carcass in their life, and just step by step rolled through the process of butchering a hog and knowing what the different cuts of meat are, knowing how to care for it, how to do it properly and safely, start to finish. And then at the end of the class, everybody brought home a cooler full of meat.
Come on. That's the best way to learn right there.
Yeah, for real.
It is.
That's awesome. Let's, Kriss-Abigail, let's hear from you a little bit. Let's, roll it back to the beginning. How did you, was the outdoors part of your lifestyle growing up, and in what capacity, your involvement in the kitchen, and where did that lend itself to you when you were younger, and maybe how did you transition into this role that you're in now?
Oh boy. Well, that was an awesome intro, Dan. Thanks. That was great. I actually had zero exposure to the outdoors growing up. I'm like born and raised Chicagoan. So I grew up very urban in the middle of the city. I always say my exposure to nature was the zoo, which was also in the middle of the city. We drove through blink and you miss 'em towns, where I live in a blink and you miss it town now. So I didn't even know hunting was a thing. It was, aside from movies and TV shows, it just wasn't on my radar. I didn't know anyone who hunted. I didn't even know anyone who really fished, in that way. So how I ended up in Texas is my folks purchased some property in the Texas Hill Country about 20 plus years ago, and they used it sort of as their second home, and they retired up here. And in Chicago, I was a professional photographer for a very long time. And so I did live performance, editorial stuff, fashion, just as different as you could get from where I am today. Uh, and I wanted something different. And so I came down to Texas with the intention to sort of figure it out. A lot of my friends called it my retirement as I was moving out to the country in the middle of nowhere. Um, and obviously they could be further from the truth now, but I was trying to sort of figure out what my next step was. I was really open, and I'm a curious person by nature. So I thought, what can I do next? And cooking had always been on my radar. My father's a great cook. Uh, we would have supper parties in Chicago, always around food. Chicago's a big food city. So I was always involved in the culinary world in some way. And so I decided that I was going to go to culinary school. But at culinary school, even before I enrolled, they told me that I needed to go work in the restaurant industry, that I had never done that before, if I wanted to continue, it's a lot of money to go to culinary school. And so I did that for a bit, and I realized that restaurant work was not for me. Like I did, I'm a back of the house kid. I'm not a front of the house kid, and even more so, I'm like a prep cook. I don't typically like line work. So then again, I found myself trying to figure out what to do. And I was just looking all over the internet. I actually answered a random Craigslist ad. And the Craigslist ad said game processing, looking for seasonal help, learn knife skills. And I had no idea what anything meant other than like learn knife skills.
Oh, I was gonna say, like, that's a old move right there. Like, I know what my deer processor looks like, and I wouldn't throw just anybody in there.
Yeah. Well, so I end up there the first weekend after Thanksgiving, right? So Thanksgiving, huge. So they're slammed. I don't know anything. I think I'm just going to go there to wash dishes because I'm not a butcher. I don't know what I'm doing. But as y'all know, when it's deer processing, you're just throwing bodies at the deer in order to get them up and out the door. So within my first day, I had a hind quarter and a knife and was going to work and promptly fell in love with it. And I stayed at that same processor for about 6, 7 years.
Wow.
Before moving on. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you ever do any work at a processor, Dan?
No, I have not.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of them. I've seen a lot of good looking ones and a lot of bad looking ones.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of my own stuff hanging up in the shed, but nope, never been working in an official processor.
So what was it about being in this deer processor that kept you there? Like what kept you intrigued and kept you on for 6 years?
Well, it was a challenge, right? It's something that I had I was a blank slate when I walked in there, and I love to learn. And like I said, I'm curious, so it's just my curiosity was piqued. And even more so when I started to realize, like, I could never separate myself from the fact that it was an animal, right? I had never been exposed to that before in my life. From watching an animal go through the process of then becoming substance, it captivated me. It was fascinating on many levels, and it really instilled in me this respect for hunting. The more years that I spent in it, the more that I spoke with hunters. Even before I did hunt camps, the more it really instilled a respect in me for the industry, for the stewardship of it, for the ethics behind it. And so it kind of became my mission really to learn the most that I could and then sort of share that knowledge. 2020 hit and everybody's like, where am I going to get my meat? Where's food supplies coming from? And so that's when I really started doing like meet your meat stuff, where it was I would post a carcass, through my photographer's eyes, trying to make it graphic but not gory. And to be able to show, hey, these are where, your like fajitas come from. The same muscles on a steer, is on a deer. And how cool is that to have that connection? right? And so the more that I butchered, the more that I wanted to hunt. So I butchered for many years before I went on my first hunt. And it sort of, that's where it grew, this sort of desire to then connect myself to my own meat, because I had done it for so many hunters in the past. It's like I wanted to take that next step. And once I took that next step, then it just like reaffirmed that the work that I do as a processor, the work that I do as a butcher is honorable and it's important, and it's my way of honoring, I always say that I'm honoring the hunted first and then the hunter.
Mm.
I want to make the most beautiful products out of this animals whose life was taken so that when it gets to the table, there's just like joy, that this hunter feels empowerment and pride that they're supplying food for their family. And I get to be a part of that. And that's like, to me, that's even higher than like being a chef or being in a restaurant, right? It's intimate, it's purposeful. It's meat that was worked for. Um, and so that's always been really special to me. It's been special to reconnect people to where our food comes from. That's been a really important part of it for me because I didn't know, and so it's like, well, I didn't know. I know that no one else, that I know that I grew up with knows. And so I did a couple of pop-up dinners in Chicago where I actually took up an access deer and I did a butchery demonstration in the middle of the city, in a very Logan Square, very urban neighborhood to a bunch of folks who are not hunters, that were foodies and interested, right? Like interested in these conversations about the stewardship of our food. And so I did a butchery demonstration and then we ate the access deer, heart and all, and so those kinds of things where we can bridge that gap, and rewrite, like I said in my pre-interview, rewrite that narrative of what like hunting looks like, what conservation looks like, and what a hunter looks like. I think is really important towards spreading the message of like conservation and stewardship of our wild places. So, in short, long story short.
No, that was incredibly well said, and a lot of things I want to talk about there. But you're right. Like, it's funny you said intent and purpose while you were talking about that, and we just had a Luke, the owner of the company, does a monthly mindset call with the team at the end of every month, and that was the topic for this past month. And living a life of intent and having purpose, right? You are in charge of that. Nobody else is there to determine that. You have to figure that out for yourself and find your intent and find what your purpose is. And maybe growing up, like you said, in Chicago without knowing any hunters, and you said you were exposed to like TV shows and movies, right? There can be a very detrimental, like almost like a pernicious caricature of what hunters look like to people who are not in the sphere of the hunting world, right? And oftentimes hunters can be made to look foolish or dumb or unsafe or whatever, redneck or whatever, right? In that world. So I think what you're doing is like beautiful and so important, right? Because like sometimes we get in like we're just like a sounding board to ourselves, right? This is the Hunt Lift Eat podcast, right? If you're not into hunting, like if you're anti-hunting, you're not listening to it, right? So like, of course, people are going to listen to this and resonate with that, right? But sometimes the question is like, how do you get that message about the stewardship, about the conservation, about treating the meat correctly, and the ethics to somebody who is not exposed to it? And I think you're doing that in a way that a lot of hunters don't get the opportunity to sometimes. And I think that's really beautiful, right? And the intent and purpose of that is really awesome, especially like you mentioned the pop-up dinner in Chicago. I think it's a wonderful way to open dialogue and have conversations with folks like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I always use Bambi as a perfect example, right? Like Bambi is the version that we all grow up with, especially, in the city. That's our exposure to hunting. And they're not even hunters, they're poachers, right? Like, you know anything, if you know anything about the world, it's like, oh, hunting and poaching is not the same thing, right? And so even then, there's just the narrative that hunting is dirty and backwoods, and it's like grocery store meat is safe and sanitary, and it's like the opposite couldn't be more true when you get down to it, right? Wild game by far is much more nutritious. It's the most humane way.
Yeah.
Like and that's the thing that I always tell people. If you're a meat eater, you are undoubtedly responsible for the stewardship of the animal that you're eating, and you have to come to terms with it. It's uncomfortable to watch an animal be butchered for sure, especially if you've never done it before. You've never seen it before, it's with outside the realm. Um, but that discomfort, I think, tells you a lot about your relationship to your food and your relationship to yourself, right? If you are so uncomfortable that you cannot accept the fact that the steak on your table comes from a steer, then maybe you don't eat steak, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of conversations around food that we're not having, that we could be having, and yeah, on this podcast, maybe people aren't into hunting and they're not into lifting, but damn, we're all into eating,
That's right.
right? We all have social media, we're all into eating. And so that is the commonality. And so for me is I'm seeking people who are interested in stewardship kind of across the board. And that's our commonality, right? Like our commonality is that we're interested in stewardship, whether that means that you're looking to try to buy your beef from a local rancher, right? That's a more ethical way of sourcing your meat. For me, and then in that same vein, then you can look at hunting as ethical as well, right? It's humane. It's the most ethical way of getting your food. And so why not have these conversations as meat eaters, as the stewards of the food that we're eating, right? Just as much as we talk about monoculturing, and the cropping that we're doing, the ecosystems that we're destroying in order so people can have oat milk, because they've been sold this idea of cow's milk is dangerous, or cows are dangerous for the environment. It's like, yes, at the level that we eat and that the way that we farm, it's not the animal's fault.
Right.
Right. It's our responsibility to ensure that if we are purchasing commercially, that we're purchasing good meat. And so when I talk to people about like purchasing their good meat from their farmers and their ranchers, that to me is then an opening to like, okay, do you see how now hunting may seem violent to you is not? It is stewardship. It is conservation, right? Just in the way that we want to manage the lifestyle of our domestics, our cows and our pigs and all that. We want to be able to provide management to our wild herds for the health of the animal, right? There's a lot of things that people don't see that lie beneath the surface of what the hunting world is and what hunters actually do. I always say like a hunter loves the animal and knows more about the animal that it's about to kill than the person who's advocating for it.
Yeah.
You know, so in that vein, I'm like a very big advocate for let's look at hunting different, right? Let's look at it as a reconnection, as just a part of the cycle. Not everyone has to be a hunter,
Right.
right? Like I'm a hunter, my husband's a gardener, right? Like we all have our role to play. And when we're talking about like intent and purpose, I think that part of it is that we have lost a lot of purpose, so that's another way, that's another level of teaching butchery is you're teaching these actual practical skills. Your two hands, you're doing the work, and you're seeing a return on your work. There's gratification and empowerment and a sense of purpose. And I feel like if we had a little bit more sense of purpose in our lives, we as a society would be better overall.
No, I totally agree with that. And like, kind of like you were saying, one thing that I really took away and like noticed, excuse me, from talking to you down in Texas and everything, and getting your view on it, like you said, not everybody has to be a hunter, right? And that really resonated with me. Like, I live in Colorado, and we're under an intense fight right now for our hunting rights in Colorado. It seems like they are attacking as much of it as they can with the mountain lions and the predator hunting going away in Colorado. I don't want everybody to be a hunter. I don't want everybody to go out and kill an elk and a deer every single year. I don't want that. I want people to understand the conservation aspect of it, then the health aspect of it. And same thing on the agriculture side as well. Like you're saying, I grew up, I'm a farm kid. Like that's all I know is farming and hunting. And just like, the guy that's hunting those deer, those elk or whatever it may be, they know more about that animal. Well, that rancher cares more about those cows in his pasture than he does his own health. I mean, there's no question about it. And just getting people to understand that, yes, there is something that's gonna die. It's gonna give its life for us to live, no matter what. We can't get around that. And that there's ethical ways of doing it, and there's ethical people doing it a certain way, and it's not all bad like the media makes it out to be.
Yeah. There's no such thing as ethical consumerism,
Yeah.
And everything dies to provide us with everything that we need. The more convenient our lives become, the more that we're taking instead of giving back. So it's true. It's like, let's try to have these conversations, right? And so I found myself in the kind of the unique, position of being someone from an urban environment that came to the outdoor world, came to the hunting world, and really sort of fell in love with the mission behind it. A mission that I found was very insular, like everybody in the hunting community knows what the mission is, right? For the most part, there's always a subsect, right? Like in every subculture, there's a small minority, right? That then becomes a narrative for everyone. But in hunting, the vast majority of hunters are looking to do better, looking to learn from each other, looking for continue that sense of purpose. That's why places like The Way We Hunt is really great for that, because The Way We Hunt, I think, appeals to hunters across the board, whether they are new or whether they are experienced. It's like, here is a great place to come and learn. And so the more I think that we have programs like that, like I do a lot of work with the Adult Learn to Hunt program with the Texas Wildlife Association, and that's geared specifically towards new hunters, and last year, they have maybe like 100, let's say 150 spots. They had 600 applications.
That's awesome.
To fill those 150 spots. So there's like a hunger for people wanting to learn in a safe place, and, with educators, with people that they can access. I think that people are really sort of hungry to get their hands dirty with work again. Which I think is really beautiful, because I do think that, like, working with your hands, seeing that accomplishment of something, you have a beginning and a clear end, really does fulfill us. It really gives us a sense of accomplishment. So yeah, I love teaching people. I love putting knives in people's hands and watching them work and seeing where they get it and helping them figure out where they don't. There's never any judgment. It's like I always say, I'm not sure Bubba's heard it, right? Every animal's the same, every animal's different. And that to me is really beautiful, because you get to have a relationship with each animal. Each animal gets to tell you its story of where it lived, what it ate, injuries, how it lived, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
That's awesome. What you just said was really optimistic, and I appreciate that. That made me happy. There's a lot of negativity these days, and that made me stoked. There's people on a wait list learning how to hunt. Adult, right? That's the best. and you
Yeah.
feel that people are wanting to get involved and get their hands dirty again. That makes me happy. That was good to hear.
Yeah.
So did you have an outstanding teacher at this processor? Is that part of the part of your process that kept you on so long and then transitioned you into, now you are in the teaching field kind of?
No, I did not. It was kind of the Wild West, and everybody, it actually was kind of a little bit of a struggle for me, to learn like the whole butchery aspect of it, because it was dirty work, and so even though women were allowed to do some of it, like the dirtier work, the skinning, the gutting, the like taking down the carcass, breaking down the carcass, that I had to kind of push to learn. And then it was really just I was self-taught a lot. There was a few butchers here and there that came through that worked a couple of seasons that I learned tips and tricks from. I actually took an online course that this lady from Chicago developed, and that was to really just help me get the vocabulary and the verbiage and all of that so then I would be able to teach other people. But really, I was kind of left in this deer processing meat room by myself to figure it out and then to subsequently train people year after year on how to do what I did. And so a lot of my technique is self-taught, but is honed over like years of teaching 20 to 30 seasonal people,
Right.
this is how we're doing it, and then like refining the skills. And uh I got to learn from some grocery store butchers that worked through some people that had been um butchers at other processors, so it was here and there, but a lot of it was just kind of my piecemealed um education. And so when it came to this idea, really what happened is I ended up working for Jesse Griffiths for a season, the New School of Traditional Cookery. And it was my first time ever really doing any sort of hunt camp. I was very nervous because I'd never done it before and I really didn't know what to expect. And what I found was that I loved hunt camps
Mm.
and that I really loved just the camaraderie of it, right? Like the secondhand adrenaline that you get when somebody comes back from their hunt and they've been successful, and it's like even if you didn't pull the trigger, you're just like hyped up
Yeah.
with them. And
Good vibe.
we're like, yeah, it's like we're gutting. And I'm like, oh my God, give me your heart and liver. You got to save the organ meat, um, and so I really just, I got so like just a huge adrenaline high off of that. And I loved it, and I loved kind of showing people and then seeing people do what I showed them and like just the look of wonderment on their face of like, oh wow, I can do this, right? It's like demystifying this. Yes, it's a skill and you have to hone it and it's practice, 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 but it's also not inaccessible
Right.
to anyone. And so I just wanted to like demystify it. And so after that season of working with Jesse, I definitely knew that like I want to be at hunt camps and I want to teach butchery to anyone who wants to learn,
Yep.
And so it was like have knives, will travel. So I started working with the Texas Wildlife Association and started doing their hunts and, accruing even more experience on hunt camps there. The Way We Hunt has been awesome at offering me lots of opportunities to join them on their educational hunt camps. And so really it's just like wherever people want to learn how to butcher a game animal, it's like I'm there. It's like, yeah, I can butcher a cow, I can butcher, I can butcher anything. I've done it all. But I definitely consider myself a wild game butcher. Those are the animals that anything hunted game that I'm drawn to and that I want to work with. So uh
That's the best. Hunting camps are the best. Dan has led last year you led a bunch of folks, a lot of newbies on their first elk hunting
Yeah.
camp. It's just
oh, that's so
I
cool.
wasn't there personally, but man, it's just the greatest vibes in the world when you're in hunt camp together.
It is. It's the community aspect, which is like something that Hunt Lift Eats, like that's our bread and butter. That's like our core is the community aspect of it. And like you said, the secondhand adrenaline, you might not even be the one that pulls the trigger. I've been in camps where nobody pulled the trigger, and like the best times of our lives still just being in that
Yeah.
environment, being out in nature and just doing what we love is incredible. So you mentioned going to hunt camps and that like you didn't end up hunting, but you have hunted now, right?
Yes.
Tell me about your first hunt. What was kind of like actually, the process like for you doing it yourself?
So my first hunt was an aoudad hunt in Mason, Texas. It took place on a ranch that's run by an organization called Operation Orphans. And what Operation Orphans does is they've been a volunteer-led organization for the last 60 years. They'll take kids in the system, foster care, all that, and they take them out into the woods for their first hunt. And so it just so happened that they were raffling off an aoudad youth hunt because they were looking to manage the herd. And a friend of mine won the tickets. And she said, "You've never been hunting before. Want to go hunt an aoudad?"
Heck yes, I'm so jealous.
And I was like, yes, you know, and I knew that aoudad had, the reputation of not being tasty, but I love trash meat. It's like I always think that it's a matter of preparation, and butchery is really what makes your meal. And so it was four of us and a couple guides, and we were blind hunting in Texas, and it was one of the most profound and beautiful experiences of my life. We got up there and got to watch nature wake up, and that was like really the first time that I had with intention, right? We're talking about with intention, had intentionally shut up and watch nature come to life,
Yep.
you know?
Yep.
And man, that was great. I was like, I'm just gonna shut up and sit here, right? Like
It's a great
it
tool.
was
Yeah.
yeah, it was so beautiful to watch, the sun come up, and then you watch, the aoudad start coming out and, rustling through the hills. And uh my guide, he told me, he's like, well, aoudad are hardy, so make sure you try to get a good shot, because they will run off into the brush and then we will not find them. And so it was like that added pressure. But I was in the blind with my good friend and the guide, and we were all, tucked in there, and they're, they definitely needed to clear out their herd, as there was a herd of 60 in front of me.
Wow.
And so it was just a matter of, yeah, it was massive. Um, And so it's just a matter of opportunity, and a lot of opportunities came and went. And I raised my rifle, a few times and set it back down a few times. And the one time I actually thought that I had a shot, I pulled the trigger, but my safety was on.
Hmm.
You know,
Been there.
but that, yeah, right.
Yeah.
But what that did is it cleared me of any nervousness that I could take the shot, because I actually did, right? Like I did pull the trigger. It just it didn't go off, let's call it divine intervention. It didn't go off. That wasn't my animal. Um, and so I finally got a ewe that was off to the side, and the sun was starting to sort of come up and more, and she raised her face to the sun, and I was like, it's now or never. And I took the shot, and luckily I got a double lung and heart shot, and she went right down right there where she was. And it was one of those emotional experiences, I think, that you can't really verbalize,
Yep.
but a fellow hunter knows exactly what it was. It runs a gamut of so many emotions and so many thoughts, and so much gratitude and so much sadness and so much sweetness, and like, it's just all melded into one. But I think what affirmed in me that I was on the right path for me was how plugged in I felt. I felt so plugged into nature, to the cycle of life. I felt like, oh, this makes sense, right? Out of everything, it's like me being here, this makes sense. Okay, this is important. I want, even if you're my friend and you never hunt, I want you to know
Yeah.
what this experience was, because it felt so transformative to me, and it really, just like I said, it really just solidified that this is the way that I want to continue the course of my career and the course of my life. Yeah.
That's awesome. What about the first time you got to eat that audad?
Oh my God, that outdid was so tasty.
Yeah,
It was so good.
they are. Right?
Do
Yeah,
they get a bad rap? I'm from Georgia, so I'm
they
not sure.
do.
Is it like barnyardy or like a goat or whatever?
hmm Yeah, a lot of folks will say, especially the Rams, that they're real stinky, that they're real goaty tasting, they're real gamey.
Yeah.
Um, which is just ridiculous, right? It just doesn't taste like beef. You know what it tastes like? An Audad.
Right.
And so it's like, yeah, it's like you don't like that wild hog, but you eat a hog that you bought in the grocery store, and genetically they're the same animal,
Right.
just one has tusks and one doesn't. And one gets fed and one lives wild, they're the same thing. But yeah, I did get the bad rap for like trash meat, like wild hogs, that they're not any tasty. But I found them really tasty. I think that, what I tell people a lot of times, especially in Texas, you're hunting a lot of exotics, so you're hunting a lot of stuff from Asia, from Africa, to take into consideration the culture that those animals come from
Yeah.
and the preparation that they're using to eat them, and all that. And that you can't, like, an Audad probably requires a lot heavier spices than a whitetail, right? They won't cook the same in terms of what you want to make with them. However, I made chorizo with my Audad and some dry sausage, and it was delicious. I was like, no one will ever tell me anything different about any trash meat.
Well, I think you're exactly right, because the first, antelope get the same whatever
Yeah.
conversation out west. And the first antelope I killed, that was my first Western hunt I'd ever been on. And I didn't start hunting till I was in college. So I was also an adult onset hunter, and killed my first antelope, and it tasted terrible. And it was hindsight, knowing what I know now, as you go through, the other cool thing about hunting and butchering is like you get better every, all the time, right? You can always grow and learn as long as you're not stubborn. I didn't get the hide off fast enough. It was too hot, and
Yeah.
it tasted real barnyardy, right? And that was like clearly a butchering fail on my part, because I had it in the back of a Kia Soul wrapped in a tarp, because that's all I could afford from the Enterprise rental. And
Yeah.
my second antelope, which I killed last fall, was unbelievable. Tasted amazing, right? Same animals, less than 50 miles apart, and the butchering process was the key to the food tasting
Yeah.
significantly better. At least me taking steps to instantly increasing the I guess happiness when consuming that critter at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true. I mean, like, the thing that we forget about is that we do all this work leading up to the hunt, but that's like all the fun, easy stuff. It's like the minute that animal is down, that's when the work starts. And that's when we get lazy. That's when it's like, oh, well, I don't want to do the work now, but for a multitude of reasons, it's important that you do so, right? Like, you're going to consume this animal. right? We talk about like, it even starts before then, right? You talk about shot placement. It's like you have to be so well informed about what it is that you're looking for at the same time to be okay with walking away with nothing. You want to like ensure that you're going to take the shot that you want to take. You have to have at least a modicum of control over that while, allowing nature to give you the shot that she's going to give you. But like the aftercare of an animal is paramount, whether you're taking it to a processor or whether you're butchering it yourself. You know, gutting it quickly, cooling it down as soon as possible, getting it hung somewhere cold. If you're not, then, getting it in the cooler, making sure it doesn't touch water in the cooler, so then you don't have waterlogged meat. There's all these things that I think that we don't think about a lot after we've killed it. Then it's just like a matter of like, oh, let's just get this done so I can go finish, drinking my 12 pack. Which I understand, right? Which I understand
Important
totally.
too, yeah.
Yeah, that's also important. That is also important. But if you're gonna go the trouble and the expense of going out in the woods and getting an animal, you're gonna want to maximize how much of that animal you can take home.
Yep.
You want like just plain and simple, you want a good return on your investment.
That was something,
and that just requires a little bit.
Yeah, that was something
Yeah.
he mentioned to me before you jumped on. We were talking a little bit, and he said, "Man, I didn't." He's like, "I've been hunting my whole life, and I didn't know how much I was still leaving on the animal until he met you and saw you work your magic down there with the way we hunt."
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that entire time. I was like, there's so many carcasses I wish I could go to right now and just peel ribs off of, and have a big old slab of rib meat, and just things that I never thought. I was like, nope, I got my back straps, my quarters, tenderloins, I'm out. Like that's it.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think that that's understandable. I think that, I had to figure out a way to maximize the yield because that was my profession, right? So I had to, because and so that's also, talking about like processing is one thing that we struggle with, like I struggle with as a processor, is discussing yield because a lot of hunters don't know. Right. They don't really know. They're like, I'm going to drop this off at the processor. It's gut shot, and it's like a Texas heart shot. So it's through the ass. And I'm totally going to get 50 pounds of meat off this. It's like, well, no, you're not. It's like, that's not, that's not how that works.
You blew
right?
it. Yeah.
But what happened? Yeah. But what happens a lot is that you have commercial processors that, they do what's called batch processing. So you may get your tenderloins, your back straps and any steaks that you might want. But after that, your trim goes into a big old bucket with everybody else's trim, and then product gets pumped out. So you could potentially shoot a little whitetail doe and say, okay, well, I want like 80 pounds of summer sausage on her. And they would be able to give you that because they would be batch processing. But that does a disservice, I think, to the hunter, because then it doesn't educate the hunter on what their yield is. Right. So then they come back and they're like, oh, I didn't get enough meat. I didn't do this, I didn't do that. Well, it's like, well, there's very real reasons why that happened. But because you're going to these processors that just put all your meat together, you're not getting a realistic view of what your yield is. And so the way that I process is we do it like individual. So for me, I really I do treat every animal like if it was mine. How would I want it? How even from like packaging it, we like what dates we put on it, how we package it, what's this family going for? So for me, that like custom bespoke aspect of it is also like my way of reaching out to hunters to try to bridge that like gap between a processor and a hunter, because rightfully so, it's like there's not all processors are created equal. Right. And so I always tell folks, make sure that, if you're not coming to me, obviously you can just tell them that you want individual processing. Like, make sure that they're doing right by you and that they're not just looking to like maximize their profits by taking your animal and dumping it with something else with somebody else who, and then the thing is, it's like if you've taken such good care of your animal, but Joe has it and your animals are going in there together, you're getting some of Joe's gamey meat in your, in your food. So always something to think about.
Yeah, for sure. I had an issue with a processor one time, and it was my fault too, just by not clarifying. I dropped a cow elk off, and I said, "Yep, I want all the backstrap, tenderloin steaks, everything else grind for ground and sausage." And he packaged all my steaks in packs of 8, so everything was frozen in 8 chunks. At the time, I was a single dude, and I was like, this sucks. Every time I
Yeah.
I want a steak, I got to thaw 8 of them and prep them for the week. And like, that was one of the things that I learned. Like, okay, I want steaks, but I want 2 per package, 4 per package, whatever,
Yeah.
like little things like that a lot of processors don't think like, man, what's this hunter doing? What does this customer want? So that's really cool to know that you kind of think about everybody's situation and what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and the meat market that I'm at now, they give me a lot of freedom in that, which I really like because then it's really kind of custom to everyone, So that makes me feel like I'm every hunter's like personal butcher, which I love because then there's that connection,
Yeah.
right? Like I want you to know that I really did take the care of your animal the best way that I could. Probably even better than you did if you got shot it and you
Yeah.
still brought it to me.
Yeah.
But I want to do right. I want to do right by that animal. It's always bittersweet when there's a loss of life. Even if it's to feed ourselves. I think that it's okay to recognize that. I think it's important that we recognize that. Death is the reason that we're alive, right? That turns into sustenance for us, and um, it's a serious relationship that we should always be conscious of. That way, that we can honor the animal and honor what we're putting in our body,
Yeah.
what we're consuming. For sure.
Yeah. Like, I don't love anything in this world, like, other than my kids and my wife, more than like hunting, right? Like, it's what I love.
Yeah.
But like the killing part is like, it's the worst, right? It's my least favorite part of the entire process. There's a lot of things. I like sitting in traffic better than I like the killing part. But it's one of the,
Yeah.
when you pull the trigger or loose that arrow or whatever, when you decide to take that life, right? It's another reason, like you said, to do right by that animal, to get good at butchering, to get good at cooking,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's why I got into cooking, was
Mm-hmm.
because of that. I'm like, if I'm going to kill an animal, like, I want to be as skilled as possible with this entire process and do right by, taking this life, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
turned into a love for wanting to learn how to butcher better and learn how to cook better. And I think that's a important part of the process, like you're talking about, in being involved in that aspect there.
Yeah, I think it's, and I always say that because people will ask me if teaching the other people how to butcher like impacts my business as a processor, and and it doesn't. For me, it's important that hunters know how to butcher their own animal, right? Like even if you decide that you don't want to do it, you should at least know how to do it. You should understand the work that goes into it. Part of it for me is sort of highlighting that invisible labor, the people that we don't see that bring the food to our table and the skills that it takes to take to bring you that food to your table, are also important to acknowledge. So I think it's beneficial for hunters to learn how to butcher. Like I said, even if they never want to do it again, even if they learn, hey, I want to hunt, but I don't want to butcher. But at least you're creating, I think, more ethical hunters too, because then you get them to start thinking about animals as mostly meat rather than just trophies. You start having them think about their meat yield, having them be more thoughtful about how they're approaching hunting. And that's always a good thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. The other thing that made me think of too is where I live in northern Colorado. Like I'm an hour and a half away from Denver, and there's a bunch of butchers down there in Springs area and stuff like that. But there's really, I think we're down to 3 wild game butchers within an hour of where I hunt and live. And it's super common come like second rifle season around October into November that a lot of those butchers are packed. Like they don't have room to do anything else. You come off the mountain with a deer and elk and you call everybody within, an hour and a half drive, and nobody can take your animal. Sometimes you got to do it yourself. And
yeah,
the other thing too with that is like you were saying earlier, when 2020 chaos kicked off too, like butchers around here were slam packed, they're backlogged with agriculture stuff. Nobody was taking any wild game. Just having the knowledge to do it if you had to or when you want to is huge.
Yeah, I agree. I think that 2020 was, I think, obviously definitive for the whole world, right? Like it's all there's like before 2020 and after 2020, I think for all of us in some way. And I do think that my hope is that the needle moved a little bit more in the direction of better stewardship of our animals, whether agricultural or wild, better stewardship of our land, as we see like ecosystems just be destroyed by this monocropping. And I really want to see hunting as part of that conversation, right? And the skills that hunting brings as part of that conversation. I know a lot of domestic butchers that have never worked wild game, and they could benefit. That's a tool that they can bring back, to their communities because it's not the same as, agricultural animals. And, there's a lot of conversation right now happening around regenerative farming and, you know, uh, free grazing and all these like really beautiful ways. And I think that hunting deserves a spot at that table.
Yeah.
When we're talking about like what's regenerative, what's conservation, what's sustainable, and what's good for this earth. It isn't just agricultural animals, and so part of it is me trying to like just like kind of insert myself into situations where it's like, okay, I want to bring hunting into this conversation that we're talking about in regenerative farming. There's in a vegan restaurant in LA, I follow a woman on Instagram. She's got a ranch out here in Texas, but she's got a very famous vegan restaurant in LA that she just started serving meat.
Mm.
She's been a vegan for a very long time, and she just started serving regenerative beef for a lot of the same reasons that we're talking right now, right? So it's like the same conversation. It would be really nice to see hunting have a seat at that table, right? Because it's just another way, the bringing people into the outdoors, even if you're not hunting. There's so many opportunities to be good stewards of the outdoors, to be advocates for the outdoors, or be advocates for hunting without ever having to kill anything. Just from the pure knowledge of how good it is for how good it is for all of us.
100%. And like Dan said, like, I don't want all these folks out on the mountain with us, right? I don't want every, you know what I mean? But like, I kind of do. And I kind of wish I could bottle up and sell, how you described your first hunt, from watching the world wake up to all the emotions that you experience. Cause there's only one way you can experience that. And that's by hunting. Right. And I wish I could like give that to somebody who hasn't experienced that. And what you're talking about, like, gets me fired up, right? If like I could talk about topsoil degeneration forever. Like
Yeah.
if you care about how we're destroying the topsoil in this country, and Dan, you're a farmer, you know this, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, if you care about regenerative farming and, you know, greenhouse gases and carbon monoxide and all these things, right? Then hunting does deserve a seat at the table, right? I worked at a chicken butchery plant in in college for 3 days, and then I quit because it was like the most abysmal thing I'd ever experienced.
Yeah.
And I was just looking for a summer job, and that actually pushed me even harder to start hunting. That's when I started pursuing that. So it very much deserves a seat at that table in those conversations, and that's actually way cool that that lady is now serving meat at her restaurant, because I wish more people could realize that or admit that it does deserve a seat at that table. People not in the realm already.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, and I think that's the thing is that, you know, I like try to see myself sort of as an ambassador, right, to non-hunting folks, because a lot of my circle is still not. You know, a lot of the people that are either viewing my things on social media or part of my life, they're not hunters. But they are people who care, right? They are people who are looking to buy their beef from a local rancher. They are looking to set up farmers markets. You know, they are looking to grow their own vegetables in their garden, right? It's like all those good things that you're trying to do, hunting does, right? Just because it involves violence in a way that we're uncomfortable with, because we're not exposed to it, because we've been hidden by it. Like, you know, if you're buying commercial meat, you're eating a violent death, right? Like, there's no such thing.
Yeah.
Violence is what it is. And this idea that people think that hunting is bad just because there's, you know, guns involved, or, you know, bows involved in that, um, it's misunderstood, right? Like, guess what? When they're harvesting your cilantro, they're using like knives to cut it, right? Like, you know, it sounds really simplistic, but it really is like the best way that I can. A plant is still a living thing that you kill to eat.
Yep.
Yep.
And you
Definitely.
still are an act. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of my, I don't watch a lot of TV, but there's like a quote in the show Yellowstone, where the guy that owns the ranch is talking to this animal activist, how like cruel he is and everything for raising cattle. And he says, how many rabbits die when the combine goes through the field to cut your wheat. And like, it just comes down to what level of death are you okay with?
Right.
Because no matter what, things have to die for us to live, no matter how big or small.
Ignore. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Like, what level of death are you comfortable with? You know, I feel like hunters are the ones that are comfortable with the least amount of death.
Yeah.
Like,
I picked this one animal, and that's it.
Yeah, and that's it. And that's it. You know, I'm not looking to destroy a whole ecosystem in order to get nourishment.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just looking to participate in what feels so very natural to my humanity. You know, I think you don't feel more human than, for me, it's like I don't feel more human than when I'm outdoors.
Yeah.
No matter what it is that I'm doing. It just feels right.
100%. I think a lot of listeners can resonate with that. And, Kriss-Abigail, we're rolling up on an hour here, but I did have one question I wanted to run by you as somebody who butchers at a very high level. When we're talking about knives, right? Do you have a particular brand? What knives do I need to have in my arsenal? What should I be looking at if I want to take my butchery skills to the next level with regard to knives or tools?
With regards to knives or tools, really, you just like need a knife that's keep sharp. You know, I always say that a sharp knife is one that's in practice. So that means practice skills. That's really the best way. You need yourself like a good boning knife and a good sharpening system. I have used Victorinox almost exclusively throughout my whole career. They're really great workhorse knives. I've had custom knives made that hold up okay. A good sharpening system, Work Sharp makes great sharpening systems that are very user friendly. But really, really what you want is you want practice. You got to drill the skills. You got to find a way to do it. A good way to start is you can get what they call like subprimals at your local grocer, right? Which is get yourself a bone in something and bone it out.
Yeah.
Like those very simple things, get a tenderloin, a beef tenderloin that's not necessarily clean from a local butcher and trim the silver skin. It's the same muscle as your tenderloin, it's like you get a pork loin backstrap that's not cleaned up. That's the same thing as your regular backstrap. Like you can apply some of your butchery skills to just things that you can get at the grocery store to just practice. And so that would really be my advice. If you're really like interested, either go to a processor, especially during season, even if it's just like a day or two a week, man, they'll take whatever help they can get.
Yeah.
You can get some skills and, find workshops. I teach workshops, I'll try to do more hunk cans. I work with the San Antonio Food Bank here in Texas. They have an on-site wild game processor called Casa Venado where they do receive donations direct from hunters and have volunteers that process it for the community. It's a really beautiful program. I'll do workshops there. So that's what I would tell people is like find any and all opportunities to just, drill the skills and that's the way to master it. And teach others. You become better at anything you do if you teach others.
Heck yeah. Dan,
Yeah.
what you got, man?
Oh man, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Other than thank you, Kriss-Abigail. I mean, I learned so much. I'm excited for people to kind of hear your story, be able to follow you on the social media world and just see what you're up to, and hopefully share another hunt camp with you in the near future.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love that.
Kriss-Abigail, where can folks learn more about Meet Your Meat or follow you on any of your social media platforms?
The best way is probably to find me on Instagram. It's Kriss, Kriss _Abigail. And then meetyourmeat.net is my website. And both of those will kind of let folks know. But you're welcome to send me questions, send me photos, do any of that. I'm pretty much an open book. I'm happy to share my knowledge. Have knives will travel. So let's get to it.
Is that a t-shirt? Because it should be.
No, it's not, but it should be, right?
I would buy that. You need to get that in production. I need one.
All right. I'm on it. I'll tell my people.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm my people.
Actually, we're an apparel company. Maybe we should tell our people. Well, maybe we could help you out.
All right. That sounds great.
Cool. Well, Kriss-Abigail, thanks so much for jumping on with us tonight. Really appreciate you.
Thanks, y'all.
Appreciate what you do, and thanks for sharing your story with us. And listeners, as always, we appreciate the hell out of you guys. We'll talk to you next week.